Peter?
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. So, this past week, a few days ago, I believe on Wednesday, a young Muslim woman killed herself in India. She had been sexually harassed by a Hindu classmate. She resisted. The classmate slapped her in public for resisting his unwanted advances. And with nowhere to turn for assistance, she chose to commit suicide by jumping from the roof of her college library. Last month, a mob of 20 people attacked and murdered a Muslim man in the late evening in a village in Uttar Pradesh, which is India's most populous state. And this man was sitting on the porch of his house, chatting with relatives, when the mob arrived, chanting religious slogans. The accused attackers included people reportedly linked to the Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, which is currently in power both in the state and national level. The family of the murdered man says that the killing was an attempt to scare off Muslims from the village. And that was in UP. Well, just 2 months ago, 11 men got early release from prison. These men, they'd been imprisoned for life after gang raping a woman named Bilkis Bano. They committed this crime in 2002 during the Gujarat pogrom. And that massacre was launched by members of the BJP and the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, the paramilitary organization which formed the BJP. That massacre was launched within actually just the first few months of Narendra Modi taking office in his first elected office as chief minister of the state of Gujarat. Well, Bilkis Bano, she was 5 months pregnant when she was gang raped. She already had a 3-year-old daughter who was with her and was snatched from her. And the daughter's head was smashed against a rock. She was killed in front of her mother. In fact, in total, around a dozen members of Bilkis Bano's family were murdered on that incident, on that occasion. And yet, this year, on 15 August, India's Independence Day, the 11 men who were convicted of gang raping Bilkis Bano and killing her relatives were awarded with early release from prison. When they stepped out of the prison, they were immediately greeted with sweets. They were garlanded. And from there, they went to a special welcome home reception organized for them by a member of the RSS. Oh, and just 2 weeks ago, if you back up a little bit, please. Oh, I think I left that one out. Well, you'll just have to visualize it. Just 2 weeks ago, in Gurugram, which is a city on the outskirts of Delhi, the capital of the country of India, of course, a mob of 200 people invaded a masjid. During evening prayers, the armed mob ransacked the mosque and threatened to kill all of the people who were inside praying and said they wanted to kick all the Muslims out of the area. Well, you see, that sort of crime in India today has really become rather routine. In fact, from Bilkis Bano to the attack on the Gurugram Masjid, to the young lady who committed suicide, the Muslim man who was murdered, that is the environment and social climate of Modi's India today. But it's not just Muslims who are suffering or being persecuted. It's also Christians. Last year, for instance, there were at least 505 violent attacks reported against Indian Christians. And when I say attacks, I don't mean just one person attacking one person. Almost all of these violent incidents, probably about 90% of them across the country, were mob attacks on entire congregations. And this is what it looks like. Yeah, there you go. Imagine it's Sunday, and Christians are gathering for Sunday service, as they tend to do. And then outside of the sanctuary, while the people inside are worshiping, they're minding their own business, outside gathers a mob of 50 or 100 or 250 or 500 people who are oftentimes armed, And the mob bursts into the sanctuary. They begin smashing and destroying everything. They start beating the congregation. They seize the priest or the pastor, the clergy member, and they drag everybody outside. Well, that happened hundreds of times last year. And it's happening constantly this year. In fact, every single year since Modi came to power as India's PM, Prime Minister, in 2014, the number of attacks against Indian Christians has increased. Every year since 2014, there have been more violent attacks on Christians in India than in the previous year. How bad is it? Well, in 2013, year before Modi came to power, India ranked 31st among the top 50 countries in the world where persecution of Christians is most severe, according to Open Doors USA, a nonprofit which focuses on monitoring these things around the world. In 2013, Open Doors categorized the situation in India as one of moderate persecution. By 2015, 1 year after Modi came to power, India had moved up the ranking from 31st to 21st. In 2016, number 17, in 2017, number 15, in 2018, number 11, and by 2019, when Modi was re-elected to a second term, India had joined the top 10 countries where it's most dangerous to be a Christian, the persecution level now being ranked as extreme. This year, and for the past 4 years, India has ranked as the 10th most dangerous country in the world in which to be a Christian. And that is higher than, for instance, China or Saudi Arabia. Notably, to contextualize this, there are 9 other countries in the world where it is actually more dangerous to be a Christian than India. But India has 3, at least, distinguishing factors from them all. First, India is the only legitimate, officially secular democracy on the list. Second, as the world's second most populated country, India's population is about twice as much as all of those other 9 countries put together. And then third, India is the only country on this list which is a de facto ally of the United States. Well, so why is all of this happening in India? And what exactly, if anything, does this have to do with us in America or in New Jersey? Well, I'm going to get back to that question of what it has to do with us. But first, to understand why this is happening, we have to take a little bit closer look at the RSS. That paramilitary I mentioned, which created the BJP, the ruling party. Modi himself is the BJP's prime minister, but he's also a lifelong member of the RSS. And when I say lifelong, I mean he joined when he was 8 years old. The RSS was founded in 1925. The RSS is uniformed. Actually, if you can go back, please. It's armed. It is all male. The RSS is also the parent organization. It's the head of a whole family of affiliated organizations that are known as the Sangh Parivar, which means family of organizations. The RSS has a political wing, that's the BJP. It has a religious wing called the VHP. It has a charitable wing called Seva Bharati. It has a women's wing. It has wings for labor unions and farmers and lawyers and educations and for targeting tribal people and so on and on and on. But at the head is the RSS. It's like the mothership organization. Well, today the RSS has about 6 million or more members across the country of India. And that doesn't include the membership of its dozens of affiliated groups, like the BJP, for instance, which has about 180 million members. And almost all the top positions in the national government, like Prime Minister and Home Minister, and actually 3 out of 4, about 75% of all of the ministers in the national cabinet are filled by people with an RSS background. The RSS, well, it was founded for the purpose of transforming India into an ethno-religious state. The RSS believes that India is, now, always has been, and always must be reserved as a country for Hindus and solely for Hindus. The RSS embraces an ideology of religious nationalism, or Hindu nationalism, which is commonly known as Hindutva. And to quote Nikhil Mandalaparthi from Hindus for Human Rights, he writes, We see Hindu nationalism as an ideology which seeks to transform India from a pluralistic secular democracy to a Hindu state in which non-Hindus are seen at best as second-class citizens and at worst targets for extermination and disenfranchisement of all sorts. You see, the RSS's founders taught that all religious minorities in India must either be assimilated or eliminated. Assimilated or eliminated. Especially Christians and Muslims, they believed, must be eliminated. The RSS called Christians and Muslims foreign to the land, internal threats to the country, and even traitors to the nation, simply because, and yes, I said traitors, simply because they chose to follow a religion of their own choice. Sikhs and Buddhists, they actually also have sought to assimilate by denying and stripping them of their right to hold a separate and unique identity. But Christians and Muslims, well, the RSS particularly hates them and basically wants to exterminate them from the country of India. And when I say exterminate, well, back in the 1930s, when the RSS was young and developing, its founders were actually looking with great admiration towards the original fascist movements in Europe. They even visited Mussolini in Italy, toured his fascist organizations, then came back and boasted about how, well, India needs fascist groups just like Mussolini has in Italy, but, you know, the founders of the RSS said the good news is we already have one, because the RSS is exactly such an organization. They also looked over at Nazi Germany and said, they saw what Hitler was doing, the way he was treating the Jews, and they said, you know, that looks like a great idea. We should treat Muslims in India the same way that Hitler's treating the Jews. Yes, the RSS's founders looked at the precursors to the Holocaust and decided that method, that model, was a good one to adopt and replicate towards India's religious minorities. And the RSS, unsurprisingly, in context of all that, is no stranger to employing violence over the 97 years since it was created. It has staged pogroms, that is massacres of religious minorities, mostly Muslims, but also Christians on small scales and large scales. Sometimes pogroms where they kill 20, 50, 100 people, and sometimes pogroms where they slaughter 2,000 people. It has staged assassinations. For instance, the first terrorist incident in independent India was the assassination of Mohandas Gandhi by an RSS member. It has staged terrorist bombings, and don't take my word for it. Ask the RSS members themselves. At least 2 full-time RSS members, one just a couple of months ago, have confessed that the organization was involved in a string of anti-Muslim bombings throughout the early 2000s. And so, the RSS is a massive paramilitary. It's almost 100 years old. It has a history of all kinds of anti-minority violence. It has a supremacist ideology that was inspired by the original fascists. It controls, essentially, India's ruling party today. It has an iron grip on power in the world's largest democracy and second most populous country. I mean, that alone should be a little bit concerning. And we're seeing how the RSS holding power in India is leading to an explosion of anti-minority violence in the streets of India. But of course, it's not just at the street level. Persecution is also ballooning at the state level through legislation. And I could go on and talk about the Citizenship Amendment Act, which basically premises acquisition of Indian citizenship on religion and sets a precedent for preventing Muslims from becoming citizens. I could talk about the National Register of Citizens, which seeks to force everyone living in India to prove that they are a citizen, and creates a potential pathway for stripping non-Hindus of citizenship. Or I could talk about the anti-conversion laws, which have now been adopted in over 1/3 of the states of India. Almost all of these laws were passed or updated only in the past 8 years after the RSS-BJP came to national power. Provisions vary, but these laws typically require that when somebody wants to convert, to change their religion, that they have to receive, they or the clergy involved in the conversion ceremony, or both, must inform and sometimes even receive permission from the local magistrate and undergo a waiting period of, in some cases, up to 2 months. Failure to do so is punishable by hefty fines as well as prison sentences ranging in some states up to as long as 10 years. In other words, in over a third of India today, if you want to change your religion, you can no longer legally do it unless you get permission from the government. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like religious freedom to me. And I could also talk about the so-called love jihad laws, which have been adopted in several states and basically criminalize interfaith marriage without government permission. They're targeted primarily at Muslims and inspired by this crazy conspiracy theory that there's a huge problem with Muslim men deceiving Hindu women by pretending to be Hindu, getting the Hindu woman to fall in love and marry them, and then, surprise, surprise, revealing that they were actually a Muslim all along. It's called love jihad. It's those bad Muslim men are stealing our pure Hindu women conspiracy. And it's so widespread in India today that they've actually made laws against it. Basically, these laws are being used to prevent interfaith marriage. And I could go on and on. I could talk, for instance, about how journalists, activists, academics, social workers, and others, sometimes even elected officials, are being constantly arrested, oftentimes thrown behind bars for years, simply because they criticize the Modi regime, or the RSS, or the Hindu nationalist movement. But we would be here all night if I did that. So, all of that said, all that bad stuff is happening. We can lay it at the feet of the RSS. The RSS is, as I like to repeat, the world's oldest, largest, and fastest growing fascist movement. I mean, that alone should be a little bit concerning. But wait, there's more. You see, all this is happening literally, quite literally, on the other side of the globe, right? This is far, far away from here. And yes, we do have a humanitarian interest in it. But after all, it is on the other side of the world. Well, the rise of the RSS BJP and its continued increase actually touches very close home to us here in America. In fact, even closer to home, right here in New Jersey. Raise your hand if you've heard about the bulldozer incident in Edison. Well, then I'm sure most of you have heard about the now infamous bulldozer incident from August. In Edison, New Jersey, on 14 August, during an India Day parade, the parade included a bulldozer. The bulldozer was bedecked with pictures of Modi and of Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath. In Hindi, on Yogi's picture, was the phrase, Baba Bulldozer, like Daddy or Papa Bulldozer. Now, I've talked about how a foundational ideological aspect of the RSS BJP is its devotion to transforming India into an exclusively Hindu nation where all minorities, but particularly Muslims and Christians, are either subjugated or eliminated. The bulldozer has increasingly come to symbolize that goal. Under Yogi's regime in Uttar Pradesh, in particular, the machine is being used to routinely and extrajudicially demolish the homes, businesses, religious sites of Muslims, particularly those known for dissenting against Yogi. As the New York Times reports, bulldozers have become a symbol of oppression. As France 24 explains, bulldozer justice is now perceived as an example of an unlawful exercise of collective punishment. Meanwhile, Yogi, in campaigning for re-election, has actually embraced the term Baba Bulldozer. So inclusion of this bulldozer in the India Day Parade at Edison represented, back the bulldozer please, represented an open endorsement of one of the BJP's current most egregious anti-Muslim tactics. And it sent a very clear message. Indian minorities are unwelcome in New Jersey as they are as unwelcome in New Jersey as they are under RSS BJP rule back in India. In the words of the New York Times, to those who understood its symbolism, it was a blunt and sinister taunt later likened to a noose or a burning cross at a Ku Klux Klan rally. So the bulldozer got a lot of attention, and deservedly so. But there were some other important elements of the parade that got a lot less press coverage. There was, for instance, a national spokesman for the BJP serving as the Grand Marshal of the parade. And no, not an ambassador or a consul or some Indian government official, a spokesman for the ruling party. In other words, the parade, which was billed as a celebration of India's Independence Day, was a partisan political event from top to bottom. And that bulldozer, well, marching in front of the bulldozer was a contingent of the Overseas Friends of the BJP, or OFBJP. The OFBJP is the international wing of the BJP. They are an organization founded to provide propaganda, international foreign support for the BJP. They do this both by propagandizing for the BJP internationally, as well as actually returning to India to work in campaigns to get the BJP elected. And what does this look like? Well, back in 2014, when the BJP was first elected in India, here in America, the OFBJP was holding training camps for its volunteers. They organized phone banks consisting of hundreds of people who sat on the phone in America and called voters in India to tell them to vote for the BJP. And then they also organized about 2,000 or more volunteers to actually fly to India, spend weeks or even months there, and physically in-person campaign for the BJP. In other words, thousands of people from America, a lot of them apparently US citizens, not Indian citizens, traveled to India to interfere in that country's election. Well, the OFBJP was formed in the early 90s. It was in operation for almost 30 years, and it did its part to help get Modi elected. It was originally registered as a nonprofit organization right here in New Jersey. But in 2020, alongside rumors that it was under investigation by the Department of Justice, it finally registered as a foreign agent in America. Okay, so you remember the Sangh Parivar, that family of organizations with the RSS at the head? The RSS on top, with all these affiliated groups, including a political wing, a religious wing, etc. So the BJP has an international wing called the OFBJP. Well, the RSS also has an international wing called the Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, or HSS. And actually, many of the RSS's affiliates, many of these organizations within the Sangh Parivar, they all have separate affiliates, international affiliates here in America. But for the sake of clarity, we're just going to talk a little bit about the HSS right now. At the Edison Parade, the OFBJP was leading the way for the bulldozer. Well, a little ways behind, the bulldozer was marching a contingent of the HSS. Now, the HSS and the OFBJP, they're legally separate entities, but they have a long track record of crossover membership and leadership between the groups. A lot of OFBJP leaders have been HSS members or leaders, and vice versa. And the HSS is a legally registered nonprofit based right here in New Jersey, headquartered in Rockaway. Now, I call the HSS the international wing of the RSS, and they don't like that very much. But hey, don't take my word for it. Let's just ask a couple of pro-RSS authors what they think. Rajiv Malhotra, who's an infamous Hindu nationalist author who's actually also based here in New Jersey, writes, HSS is RSS's foreign name. This is important for those unfamiliar with the RSS. Well, what about Professors Walter K. Anderson and Sridhar Damle? They're the co-authors of kind of a history of the RSS, a book that was written with unprecedented access to that paramilitary. It's essentially an RSS-approved history. In fact, two things. One, Sridhar Damle, the co-author, he says that Modi himself actually suggested they write this book. And two, Sridhar Damle is, or at least was, the president of the Chicago chapter of the HSS. And well, what do these two co-authors have to say about the HSS? Well, in their book, they call HSS the overseas counterpart of the RSS. They actually go on to describe a few of the HSS's operations. For instance, they talk about how HSS workers often go back to India to attend advanced training camps run by the RSS. The goal of these camps, they say, is to create an international pool of RSS workers to be assigned anywhere in the world. And they go on to explain how a lot of HSS leaders here in America were actually RSS members back in India, how a lot of training sessions held by the HSS here in America are conducted by full-time workers from the RSS or visiting from India, and so on. The HSS, though, also does things like sponsor events featuring speakers from India. And for instance, they sponsored an event in Atlanta a couple of months ago for Sadhvi Ratambra. Sadhvi is the founder of the women's wing of the RSS, and she's quite a colorful personality. Her rhetoric has been described as the single most powerful instrument for whipping up anti-Muslim violence. For example, back in the early 90s, when an RSS BJP mob tore down the 16th century Babri Masjid, she was one of the main people whipping the crowd into a frenzy. In the aftermath of that mob destruction of a historic mosque, the frenzy continued as mobs murdered about 2,000 Muslims across northern India. Anyways, so that's the lovely lady that the HSS sponsored to speak in Atlanta. Sadhvi actually went on a multi-week national speaking tour of the US, and last month she was supposed to speak in Ridgewood, New Jersey. And it's unclear if the HSS sponsored that specific event, but it's probable. Now, thankfully, protests against her event in Ridgewood got canceled, which actually had international repercussions because she was supposed to also do a tour of the UK afterwards. That got canceled too. What else does the HSS do here in America? Well, all across the nation, next one please, there we go. All across the nation, they go to city councils and county boards to solicit proclamations. They present themselves as a benign religious organization. They get ignorant elected officials to pass proclamations praising them, and then they stack these up and use them as PR to promote their organization. You can see just a sample of them. That's from their Facebook page from this year alone. In fact, they even get these from state legislatures sometimes, or governors. As recently as last year, for instance, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy gave the HSS a letter praising them for all the good work they do. Somehow I doubt that the good governor bothered to actually Google the HSS before writing that letter. Anyways, as we move to a close, while the HSS stacks up all of these official governmental proclamations, which really helps to legitimize it and give it a veneer of credibility, its leaders and members, and I want to emphasize this for accuracy, this is not done by the organization, but rather what appears to be an organized and deliberate fashion by the leaders and members of the HSS. They are pouring money into the campaign coffers of various politicians. This is at the state level. For instance, State Representative Bob Macupa in Michigan, State Senator Neeraj Antanya in Ohio. They have both received heavy funding from leaders and members of the HSS, the OFBJP, and other related organizations. This is also at the congressional level. For instance, Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard, during her first 2 terms in office, got about 20 to 25% of her entire campaign funding year after year from these kinds of sources. And apparently in return for it, she took various steps in office to try and derail congressional attempts to call out Modi and Hindu nationalist violence. Well, Gabbard is gone, but we still see it at the congressional level with Congressman Raja Krishnamurti in Illinois. He's running for re-election right now, and aside from the campaign financing he gets from people involved with the HSS and other groups, he has also been out on the campaign trail as recently as this summer, which I personally witnessed, with an entourage surrounding him on the campaign trail of longtime OFBJP activists and leaders. Concerningly, Raja Krishnamurti apparently has ambitions to run for US Senate. Gabbard, meanwhile, has already tried, although unsuccessfully, to run for president. And right before she launched her campaign, interestingly enough, she reportedly held consultations with a lot of the top-level leaders of these various American Hindutva groups. Well, beyond that, there are now 3 people, all appointed this year, 3 people with various kinds of ties to American Hindutva groups who've been appointed to roles in the Department of Homeland Security. The most recent person appointed just a few weeks ago is actually on the board of directors of the HSS here in America. So thankfully, there are not a lot of politicians with these kinds of ties who currently hold office or who have been appointed to various departments, like I mentioned, the DHS. But the ones who are out there are in positions or have been in positions of pretty deep influence. Tulsi Gabbard, for instance, was at one point the #2 person in the Democratic Party. And Krishnamurti in Illinois, well, he sits on the House Intelligence Committee with access, he's privy to privileged information. Then, of course, there are the people now serving as advisors to the Department of Homeland Security. So, the situation in India is reaching crescendo levels of crisis. International experts are, without any exaggeration or hyperbole, they're warning that the country is on the path to genocide. And most of the steps for genocide have already been taken. All that is left now is for the violence to break out on a more systematic, and sustained level than what we're already seeing. Some people actually might argue, in fact, the genocide is already underway. So as human beings, we all have a moral responsibility to not just care about this, but actually take action to stop it. As Americans, however, we also need to look at our own backyard to realize how a lot of what's happening in India today is actually very closely connected to us here in this country on a practical level. The regime back there in India, for instance, got into power with the helping hands of thousands of activists living here in America. Efforts to hold that regime accountable for human rights violations are constantly being opposed and sabotaged by various entities right here in America. And what is even more frightening is that the hate being spread there in India is being actively reproduced right here in America. Here in New Jersey, in fact. As we saw with that bulldozer in the parade, or with Sadhvi Ratambra being scheduled to speak up in Ridgewood. In closing, I'll quote Dr. Audrey Trushka from Rutgers University here in New Jersey, who says, Hindu nationalism is threatening American multicultural values. If you like diversity, if you believe people who are different and who follow different religions should live together, and that we are all Americans, Hindutva is a threat to that. And it is growing, it is not going away, it's likely to get worse. Hindutva is a threat in India and in America. So, I really do hope and I pray that first of all, we as Americans start to wake up and rouse ourselves from our ignorance of the situation and begin to realize that not only there is a problem in India, but it's a problem of potentially catastrophic proportions. And I hope and I pray that once we've acquired a little bit of knowledge and understand the gravity of the situation, we will be willing to stand up, speak out, and do something to both help those who are suffering in India and also to oppose those here in America who support the brutal fascist regime back there in India. Thank you.